Women of Reddit, what was the smallest thing a guy did on a date that seemed to be going really well, that completely ruined it? Date was going great, nice guy, really sweet, very smart. When he ate he took like 4 or 5 bites at a time before chewing. He filled his face as full as legally possible. His cheeks would bulge out and he could barely keep his lips shut. You could see all the food mashed up and grinding around through his little mouth hole. I knew in that moment that I hated him. Now I'm just imagining teams of lawyers debating how much food in your mouth at once is the legal limit. Nice guy, nice date. Except that he got annoyed every time I interrupted him to respond to something he just said. It was impossible to keep a conversation going because he would ramble on, and when he was finally done talking I had at least 3 different things to respond to. The conversations couldn't evolve because he didn't allow me to jump in with answers, counter-arguments or points of view. He made reservations at one of the most expensive restaurants in our city. When I sheepishly offered to split it, he says, "Oh, you didn't think I was going to pick this all up, right? I don't have that kind of money. I don't care about how much money you have, bro, but if we're splitting it, I get to have a say in where we are going." I was in college and could barely afford my half. I never answered him again after that. Guy offered to buy me a drink. I don't drink, and had told him that before I agreed to go on the date, so I figured he'd just forgotten and I politely reminded him. But then he wouldn't let it go and kept making me justify why I don't drink. It got as far as him saying he couldn't think of any reason I would need to be able to think clearly before I noped the heck out. It's really a shame because prior to that he seemed really nice. I studied abroad and some dude would not let the fact I didn't drink alone. He bothered me about it at least 4 hours in total per week for the duration of my stay. I don't know why people can get so obsessed about that. I was around 15 and went out on a date with a 17-year-old boy. It was the first date of my life and I was pretty stoked. He was really fun and I thought it would be super sweet. I barely knew him though. Anyway, we were sitting at this bench next to a street lamp, talking about our lives and stuff, but he couldn't look me in the eye at all. His eyes were fixated on my boobs. It was so uncomfortable. Sometimes I'd just stop talking and he didn't even notice. I told him I had to go home and never spoke to him again. I went on a first date with a guy who was a class away from getting his doctorate in something. Don't quite remember cause it was 4 years ago. Date was going well and trying to get to know him more. I asked about his work. I remember him saying he worked in a lab and then explained in detail about what he does. He was very smart and I had absolutely no clue what he was talking about. I told him flat out, in a polite way, that I had no clue what he was talking about, but it sounded interesting. I remember that he then got this disappointment look on his face. He then said, "This I completely remember. I guess I have to dumb it down for you. You know how in South Park." Side note, we were talking about TV shows and I mentioned though that season happened to be funny. That scientist created a monkey with 4 asses just because? Well, that's kinda what I do. I create things just because and learn from that. Do you understand now? At that point I was done. Just because I don't what you are doing doesn't mean I am dumb. After that night he texted me a few times and I didn't respond. Finally he sent me one last one demanding to know why I wasn't responding and I said, "I'll guess I have to dumb it down for you. Remember in South Park when Wendy doesn't want to date Stan anymore? So she ignores him? This is what I'm doing. Do you understand now?" Never heard from him again. Best response ever. My moment. He invited me over to his place for dinner. He filled us each a plastic cup with some kind of great wine, like a Boone's Farm type. I asked for a glass of water, and he grabs a large styrofoam Smoothie King cup, fills it with water, and hands it to me. Reddit. This cup had obviously been around the block a few times, because it had those teeth indentions everywhere on the brim of the cup. I ask, "Do you not have cups?" His response, "That is a cup." Technically, he was right. I mean, why invite me over for dinner if you're not prepared? He also only owned one knife, did not have any tables or chairs to sit at, and did not own any plates. He ate out of the skillet. I ate my food on the box it came on. This totally sounds like an April Andy scene from Parks and Rec. Not me, but I was a witness, sitting alone next to a couple in a coffee shop. Clearly first date stuff. My text message alert goes off, which at that time was the Zelda puzzle solved jingle. Guy looks over at me and says, "Oh cool, Zelda." I give him a quick smile and nod of recognition and get to reading my message. I swear I wasn't trying to eavesdrop, but this conversation ensues. What was that? Oh, it's from Zelda. What Zelda? It's a video game series. You play video games? Yeah, but it's a really cool series. They have good stories. I'm sure you'd like them. Eyes glaze over. I'm sorry, coffee shop guy. I'm sorry I made you recognize Zelda. Nah, it sounds like you did him a favor. Second date. Wrote me a poem and made me read it in front of him. It had lines about holding me and how great it was he hadn't touched me yet. LOL, I had this happen to me too, and we didn't even go on a single date. I met him at a bar with my friends. He asked me on a date. I thought he was cute, so we exchanged phone numbers. Then the poems started coming. Well, at least I am not alone in this. First date. I hadn't realized he had a pierced ear until he showed up with a dangly feather earring. I don't really like pierced ears on a guy, but I'll deal with it. Not a big feather earring, though. Still, it was okay. Thought I'd give it a second chance. Wouldn't it be terribly superficial to not give it a try over a feather earring? Maybe I wore something he didn't like, too, but he overlooked it. I invited him to a friend's Christmas party at a hotel. Second date. Shows up for the Christmas party wearing a tie with cartoon cows freaking in a variety of positions. I was torn. I like the idea of wearing something slightly different. I do not like the idea of showing up to meet new people at a cocktail party with cows doing it doggy style all over my chest. He said, "Is this making you frisky, baby, like Austin Powers?" I realized it wasn't just the clothes that were a concern. I just didn't think we had much in common if he thought all that was a good idea, even if it was small. Cows call it cow style, not doggy style. Show some respect. He got weirdly critical about me using my left hand to hold my fork with. I'm a lefty. He said it was improper. Then we went to his place. After I told him at least 3 times that we were just going to hang out, no sex, and had a beer each, and he claimed he was too drunk to drive me home. Yeah, I called my roommate and thankfully he insisted on coming to get me. But left is correct. Dodge a freaking bullet there. Not me, but a female friend of mine was just telling me about her most recent OkCupid date. Her description went something like this. Everything was going really great. He is smart and funny, and easy to talk to. He seems like a great dad to his kids and gets along okay with his ex. Always a good sign. Just really down to earth guy, and it seemed like there was some nice chemistry. After dinner we decided to go have a drink at a fun little bar about a mile away. We got in his car to drive over there. He kissed me, which was nice. Then he took out his penis. When some guys complain that women supposedly only date buttholes, this should tell them that usually they disguise themselves first. I ruined a date for a girl once. Dinner and a movie. Her suggestion. Dinner was super great. Movie, we were chatting beforehand. It's awesome. I ask if she'd like popcorn or a drink. She wants popcorn. I get to the end of the row and realize I should ask, which is what makes this crazy. I yell back, "You want butter?" I swear she nods yes. I get back to the seat. "There is butter in this?" "Yeah," I yelled back. "I thought you said yes." She said she didn't remember me doing that. So I wasn't going to fight her. I just apologized and asked if she wanted me to go get her one without. She said no, it was fine. Then in the next 5 minutes she made at least 10 comments about "I wish this didn't have butter," and at least twice she refused to let me go up and get her a replacement, or go get her own replacement, or not eat the popcorn. Finally I just made a joke about it. "You're not gonna be able to let this popcorn thing go, are you?" And she said no, and obviously this isn't going to work out. "Thanks for dinner," and she got up and left. Was on a coffee date with a guy who initially seemed really nice, but he would not stop talking about Doctor Who, even after I made it clear that I'd never watched it, had no idea what he was talking about, and wasn't interested in watching it to find out. I mean, come on, how hard is it to pick up on the fact that we've been on this subject for the better part of half an hour and I've barely said anything? Afterwards he insisted on walking me home, even after I said it was no big deal and only like a 7-minute walk. out of his way. I couldn't even ditch him at the tram stop. After telling him I thought we should just be friends, he still walked me to my door. Had to think hard that it wasn't me you were talking about. When I was 18 I went out with a guy who was 20 and said that he always got away with buying alcohol. He tried to impress me by buying a bottle of wine, but when the waiter asked for his ID, he said he had forgotten it at home. That alone wouldn't have been too big of a deal, but this happened at the second restaurant we went to that night. He had originally taken me to a much nicer place, but then after looking at the menu told me that he couldn't afford it and had us leave. I don't actually care about any of that, man. I'm on a date with you because I want to get to know you. I don't care if we go somewhere inexpensive, but don't try so hard to seem cool, especially if you can't pull it off. He had originally taken me to a much nicer place, but then after looking at the menu told me that he couldn't afford it and had us leave. This dude did not plan ahead correctly at all. I took a gal I knew from high school out on a date when I happened to be in her neck of the woods at one point. She said she didn't want anything fancy and she half suggested, half demanded that we go to Dennys, which we were thrown out of after 10 minutes due to her laughing maniacally at her own jokes and loudly recounting the story of how her and 2 of her friends went to a donkey show in Mexico as a girls' night out. I should have just taken her home then, but instead she suggested a wings and beer restaurant. Turned out she used to work there, and she spent 20 minutes in the back saying hello to all her previous co-workers. When it was finally time to order, she tells me she had already ordered for herself, so I ordered a chicken sandwich. When the food arrives I discover she had ordered 80 wings, and she proceeded to eat just the skin off the wings, leaving the meat behind, and downed 5 beers in the process. She of course had neglected to bring any way of paying because it was a date, so I had to foot the enormous bill. On our way back to her place she kept talking about how long it had been since her last clothes off, sloppy, hard sex was and that she was so ready, and once we got to her place she ended up passing out in the shower. I shut the water off, had her roommate help me get her out of the bathroom and into some PJs, and I left. Still worth a read. That chicken wing thing is just bizarre. He interrupted me about 3 times in 5 minutes. Not like nervous interruption or absent-minded. Just what I have to say is more important than what you are saying. That is a bad way to start a relationship. He farted. Now one fart. That's just hilarious. But multiple farts, making it sound like your digestive system is going to explode. Combined with the smell of 1,000 rotting corpses. Just, no, I don't date much. And he was a good guy, I just couldn't get past the endless farting. Plus, if you let all your farts out during the date then you miss the big she just walked in the house and now I'm free to fart, which is the most satisfying fart ever. He flirted with a guy for a while before we met up. He seemed like a nice enough guy and we had a few things in common. Went on a trip together but had separate hotel rooms. I figured if he was nice enough, we might have sex. He forgot his charger, toothbrush, razor for the 3-day trip. Seemed a little irresponsible but he could always go out and buy a spare. He didn't. He didn't brush his teeth for 3 freaking days. I ended up buying gum and offering it to him at every opportunity. First day I passed by his room. I saw leftover fast food containers on his table. Half cup of soda and a few fries left. Second day, it was still there. Third day, it was still there. Checkout day, it was still there. Dude didn't bother tossing his trash in the garbage can for 3 days. Or at least stick the soda in the micro fridge. Seems petty but I realized the suave guy I met online was actually a disgusting slob. You were not being petty at all. This guy's is a pig. We were different races and he just kept talking about it. There wasn't any get to know you conversation, just fixation on my race. BTW I'm white and this was in the Midwest. Not really special. Don't hold and lick the back of my hand on the first date. Then, proceed to tell me how yummy I would taste if I was cooked. I appreciate the romanticism but nope. Nope. NOPEE. Out of there ASAP because I was not about to be Hannibal's next meal. Heck, I once told a girl she had nice skin. That would have been okay if I hadn't then followed up with I don't mean that I want to use it to wallpaper my basement or anything. Fortunately, she saw the funny side, but I'd not have blamed her if she ran screaming. I always go on a date expecting to pay my half, but as you know, a lot of men pay for at least the first date. Anyway, we were at a coffee shop and he stepped up to the counter, placed his order, looked back at me and asked me what I wanted. Since this seemed like a pretty obvious sign that he was going to pay, I gave him my order and said thank you. He paid for the coffees, handed me mine, and said, "Don't expect this every time." Are you kidding me? I didn't expect this in the first place, butthole. And surprisingly, the date didn't get better. I was hanging out with a friend at his place, listening to music and sharing good conversation. Not necessarily a date, but he was being flirty and we were both single at the time. He asked if I minded if he smoked and I said no. He proceeded to get so high that he fell asleep soon after. He had picked me up so I was stuck there without a ride. It wasn't him smoking that I minded, but it made me feel like I wasn't interesting enough or something. Plus he didn't seem to think about the fact that he left me stranded there. Certainly wasn't very thoughtful of him. At the end of the date we went for a drive. He was obviously turned on and I let him know that I was having an amazing time but it was my time of the month and I wasn't feeling the whole sex thing. We had done it before so it wasn't like a first date. But he turned into a whining 4 years old and practically begged me to have sex, give head, etc. As much as I thought he was hot and loved giving him head, I legitimately was not in the mood. He kept up the whining and crap for a good 10 minutes, suggesting different things and literally begging. I decided it was time for me to go. Completely ruined the night and really put a strain on our friendship relationship in the future. Took me a lot to get over it. I dated a guy like that once. We were together for 4 months, but I didn't give it to him often enough so he went elsewhere. The entire 4 months. I apparently ruined a second date once. I wore the same pair of pants for both outings. The dates were a week apart and I honestly forgot what I wore the first time. She commented on them as soon as she saw them and then was barely communicative for the rest of the evening. Told me he traded in his old BMW for a new BMW because he wanted leather interior. He had also crashed his Nissan Z a month prior into our. We actually lived in the same apartment complex. Apartment sign outside of the complex. He was about 8 years older than me, and I thought he was irresponsible. Irresponsible is putting it lightly. That all made me groan. One time I went on a date with this guy. We went out to dinner, had some drinks and he was such a gentleman. Paid for everything. Super sweet, good looking, very complimentary, and everything was going great. We went back to his place to chill and smoke and we're watching some dumb TV show and it happens. This fool starts laughing so hard, he's dang nearly shouting and he's flailing his arms and legs in the air. I had to move to the other side of the couch for safety reasons. The date ended pretty quickly after that. Hahaha, I'm just imagining you sitting next to a human wacky, waving, inflatable tube man. Not entirely relevant, but my dad got the wrong day for a first date so didn't turn up at all, leaving her sat alone in a restaurant by herself. He must have said something right though, because they rearranged it and are getting married next year. Dang, your dad must be one smooth dude. It wasn't really a date, maybe, but I went to homecoming with the friend of my best friend. Before the dance, we went to dinner with friends. I expected him to sit by me, but he did not. He literally sat as far away from me as possible and barely even made eye contact. After the meal, the waitress asked how all of our checks were being split, and I said that I would pay for my own. My date immediately says that he'll pay for mine if he has enough money. He proceeds to open his wallet and loudly exclaims, "What was I thinking? Of course I have a lot of money." At the dance, he was mostly just grinding with his male friend, although they claimed to be completely straight. The few times he did dance with me, he seemed to look everywhere except for at me, and acted like he would rather be hanging out with other people. I didn't realize I was that boring. I don't know if straight dudes grind on each other, man. I mean, I could see someone doing it for a few seconds as a joke, but if he was mostly doing that. Honestly, know what ruined it for me? He was a nice guy honestly for the 2 hours I saw him at the cafe. A little self-centered but workable for another date to really see what's up. Then when we said goodbye he refused to drive me home 4 minutes to my dorm room. We went to a cafe a 10-minute walk from my rural campus. He drove off while I walked home. Never got a call back. All's well, which ends well. At least you didn't spend the rest of your life with him. How much time do you have? Most recently, I had the doctor who took my pulse on a first date. Weird, and then patronized me endlessly. Do you know what the difference between veins and arteries is? Are you kidding me? I had the guy who picked me up and immediately displayed his road rage by yelling "C" at 3 other drivers on the road. C is another word for mate where I live. Maybe they were just really good friends and he was calling out to them. I kind of ruined a first date once. I really liked this guy, and when I'm nervous I tend to overindulge when drinking. So here you have a guy almost twice my size, and for every beer he's drinking I'm having a glass of wine, without really thinking about it. Plus I wasn't eating much because I was so into talking to him. After the restaurant we went to a bar to continue talking drinking. By the time we left he had to help me walk home. Granted, it was snowy, and just a couple blocks, but I barely even remember the walk home at this point. While we're at my apartment, I excused myself to go throw up. I couldn't tell if he noticed or not. He left my apartment, on good terms, at least to my drunken mind. I woke up fully clothed, still wearing my jewelry and makeup, on the floor of my bathroom. I remembered what had happened, and thought, well, I like him, but I don't think he's gonna call me after that. We got married 3 years later, together 7 years in February. He still calls that night false advertising. He let me pick the movie and said he had no preference. I was obviously fixated on and enjoying the movie, but every 15-20 minutes he'd lean over and ask if I was bored and wanted to leave. After a few times I tried ignoring him and instead of getting the hint he asked if I was ignoring him. I nodded yes and he'd ask why and if I wanted to leave together until I again told him no, I am watching the movie. Met this guy online who's totally my type, chatted for a few weeks and decided to go out and have dinner together. It was all good, and he was cuter than his picture, which never happens. However, later he took out his phone and started texting his friend. I don't like to spy on people, so I didn't ask him what he was doing. He continued to do so quite a while and I just sat there awkwardly eating my food. That's when I knew he's not for me. Not commenting on the behavior, using good but not perfect pictures results in better dates online IMHO. He invited me over to his house to hang out and play video games. We had been out with mutual friends before, but this was our first time alone. We ordered pizza and I was playing video games, but he was obsessed with his stupid car and every 30 seconds he stood up to look at it out the window. Nobody was around. It was a well-lit area. He just liked his car that much. He would be in the middle of talking to me and do that head turned not looking at you while murmuring a thing while walking to the window. Bizarre. Maybe it wasn't actually his car. We were just hanging out in his dorm watching movies he made for his film class and out of nowhere he turned on these Christmas lights, turned off the main lights, and then started playing Wanted by Hunter Hayes and asked me to dance with him. It was so cringeworthy I just declined politely and got the heck out of there before he cut me up into little pieces. Other redditors will read your post and think, see what happens when a guy tries to be romantic, but this was a first date lol. If you are new to the channel, you can subscribe. I publish new videos every day. Until then, check another video. Bye for now.